Hello, my back to stuff. StarCraft 2 stuff. But first, before we do anything, drink some beer. Yeah, smoke a little weed. We're gonna sit back. We're gonna relax. We're gonna have ourselves a good time. Today, we're gonna talk about the Cloak Glaze. The Cloak Glaze, particularly vicious model by StarCraft 2, do some fairly unique things. Today I'm going to talk about how to make your own color cloak glaze and why cloak glazes are right for you. What is a cloak glaze and why is a cloak glaze important? Cloak glazes are created by a special actor known as the System Actor Config, which is a global configuration actor. Essentially, it's like a super unit that controls the properties of all units across the entirety of the game, depending on whether they're in your screen or not. When you open the Cloak Glaze actor, you will notice that it comes with its model. Now this model is strange. It doesn't make a lot of sense to people. People look at this when they're galaxy editing and they ask themselves, what the fuck am I looking at? This doesn't make no goddamn sense. It's a carrier and it's a cube. What is this? Excuse me. Ah, yeah, smoke some weed. This is what's known as the cloak model. Cloak model has various properties depending on what animation it's playing. So this, for example, is what's known as walk, which in theory is what I think is the name is used by accident. I theorize that this name comes from wanting to use the subname that is just below it. When you look at the subname just below it and you go to animation prop floater, and then you press new, you'll notice that the one that's directly below walk is unburrow and walk fast. I suspect that they were trying to use one of these names and chose it out of pure coincidence and pure fluke. So this animation here is when a unit has a cloak glaze but is not actively cloaked. This is the animation of a unit that belongs to the enemy and is becoming cloaked. This is the animation of a unit that is cloaked and belongs to the enemy. This is the animation of a unit that is losing its cloak glaze. This is the animation of a unit that is cloaked, belongs to the enemy, but is also becoming detected. It is just starting to become detected. That's why it's called Cloak Detect Start. This is Cloak Detect End. What this means is that the unit is cloaked, it belongs to the enemy, it was revealed by a detector, but now instead of being destroyed or being whatever, it has gone out of the range of being detected. So it is invisible, belongs to the enemy, it is detected, then becomes undetected. This is the animation you see. When your cloaked units belong to you and they become cloaked, they perform this function, which is called Cloak Start. Cloak is the standard normal state that they are in. Cloak End is what happens whenever you press the decloak button, or a cloaked unit gets afflicted by an ability that prevents cloaking, such as fungal growth. EMP does not cause this. Storm does not cause this. There are very few abilities that will actually trigger this, Cloak End. But anytime that something decloaks, this is when this happens. This is when this fires off. And now we're back to the original, where it's turned off. This model is not actually a model. What we're seeing here is a glaze. So basically, in this model, there's this glaze. Inside this glaze, there's this model. And we can see it by going in here and looking at it. The way this model works is that using the actor, known as the system actor configuration, applies this material to all units in the game that are considered cloaked. The material does not load these parts. So these parts of the mesh, this random placeholder carrier and this random placeholder terrain cube, does not use these. These models are not rendered. They are here to help us to see what the Cloak Glaze does, which turns out to be quite a bit. If you want to change the color of your Cloak Glaze, you have to go to this material here. It's called SC2 color, and you change that to another color. So in my example, I've changed it to gray. So we go to this cloak model, we see the cloakiness, very specifically the animation called cloak. As you can see, depending on the camera angle, it actually does all kinds of weird stuff. But when it's invisible, you can see that it hardly does anything. Now we are going to change this model. So we go to the model, go to cloak, and as you can see, I've already actually pre-prepared this. This is my version. This is my personal version of cloaking. The reason I made this was because I wanted to make cloak feel less Protoss. I wanted originally to give each race their own cloak color, which I've managed to figure out how to do. The Protoss, for example, are going to be cloak blue, and Terrans, for example, are going to be this. They're going to be transparent gray. But the color is added by a different glaze, so I ended up cheating. I'm using two glazes to do what I'm doing. But the moral of the story is that if you want to change the color of the glaze, you actually have to open this model and actually change this layer. The SC2 color. The carrier is done via this material, which is called the base material, but it's not even really used. Just the Colossus. This is what's put on the brick. What also is put on the carrier and the brick. The two that matter are called the cloak displacement and the cloak energy. The cloak displacement is what controls this look. This is the displacement material. You'll notice that you can see the lines of the texture in the normal map. It's along these hard ridges, for example. Area. These parts of the textures get shown via the normal map. And the normal map does this because of the displacement layer. So basically the diffuse, this is called the diffuse here. The diffuse is set to 1%. The normal, the height map, the specular, the gloss, the emissives, and the alpha channels, and the environmentals are all changed to 0%. That's part of what happens. The other part that happens is that an energy gets added, called cloak energy. And cloak energy is not seen by the enemy. Cloak energy is only seen by you. when you are in these animations. As you can see, I have radically altered the way that Cloak works. I have changed it so that instead of every unit getting a blue tinge, they instead simply get a thinner gray tinge. I did this because I'm trying to emulate the way that stealth looked in the old Command and Conquer games. In old Command and Conquer games, units had stealth as well, and the way that they depicted stealth was by being transparent gray. My thought is that Terran units look too blue when they're cloaked. I don't particularly like it. I honestly would rather do another color. And I always wondered why Dark Templar are blue when really it should be green. So that's how I achieved coloring stealth units different colors. Was by changing this model to be gray. And then applying the color through another glaze. It's double the data, but it's worth it if you want to change the color of stealth units. And you don't want all the color of the stealth units just to be blue. Giant tidal wave sea of blue. So if you want your Nerazim units to be green, and you apply a glaze. And if you want your Protoss units to be blue when they're invisible, you apply another glaze. Or in my example, where I wanted Terran units, just be transparent gray. Zerg units are actually completely different. They don't use any of this nonsense. They use a very specific property. Their flags. It's called the is buried flag. Buried. Also known in the validator tree as is burrowed or is buried. Only Zerg, only very limited number of Terran units and some other units, but mostly Zerg units use this flag. What this flag does is it disables this actor event. So even if you were to set a unit as cloaked and buried, they wouldn't display any of this. They wouldn't display this color. They wouldn't use this glaze. This glaze wouldn't do anything. To the enemy, it is simply invisible, and to you, it is simply its ordinary normal color. That's why units like Lurkers and Widow Mines, they don't get affected by the blue tinge like other stealth units do. It's because the stealth is turned off. It gets turned off by this flag. If this is checkmark boxed, then none of your cloak glazes are going to show up. They simply don't exist. It's like a type 2 cloak. One cloak is used by like the Wraiths. Mostly it was originally the very first cloak unit in the game was Wraiths. You can tell by the data because the data of the ID number of the Wraith is infinitely lower than the ID number of the Dark Templar. So we know which stealth unit was created first. It was very obvious. It's the Wraith. Abandoned for multiplayer, but it was the first stealth unit to be actually fabricated by Blizzard. Use these ID numbers as a tool to figure out what order the game was created in, which can be helpful if you're trying to find rare pieces of data or rare pieces of model assets that are otherwise somewhat hidden. To open the display, to open these models, you have to actually, these cloak models, you actually have to change all these colors and all these things here. So for example, this is also gray, and over here, there's there's a SC2 color there, but the real magic comes from this. This is called a composite. For those of you that don't know anything about StarCraft 2 and come here from my Aliens videos, StarCraft 2 is a sequel to a game called StarCraft 1, and in StarCraft 1 and 2, there are units similarly to Command and Conquer that turn invisible and do various different things when they're invisible, give them the advantage of surprise and also pompous impunity. because in StarCraft 2's example, units can't be attacked if they're not detected. So if you have cloaked units and you attack the enemy before they get detection, the game's over. It ends, much like a chess match. In Command & Conquer, it was not like this. When units attacked, they'd lose their stealth momentarily, but it would be for such a brief period of time that a lot of units either couldn't attack or would miss, or the attack would do so little damage that it didn't matter. And this was fairly important, especially with those really fucking cancerous buildings. Most of you have no idea what I'm talking about, but they're called stealth field generators. Command & Conquer, there are these things called stealth field generators, which created a gigantic area of effect stealth aura that applied stealth to all the units in the area's effect around the stealth generator. The Protoss race in StarCraft 2 get this as well in the form of the mothership, which gets an ability that stealths all the units around it. That stealth is applied by this composite material. So it applies the energy, the cloak energy material, it's this one. It applies the displacement material, which is this one. And it overrides these two materials, which in this example is the Cloak Glaze model and the Cloak Alpha model. These two get overridden by this. This uses these two to override it. When this is applied to your units, it does both of these things. And both of these things happen because of their animations. So there's about 8 animations. I should correct that. These 8 animations cause the model to do different things. And this is all of them. So cloak start, that's when it turns blue and from being normal. This is when it is blue. This is when the blue disappears. When the blue is not there at all. This is where it becomes transparent. It starts to become transparent. The unit disappears. It evaporates. This is the light shimmer. This is the shimmer disappearing and the unit being revealed. This is specifically used, such as when a banshee hits the button, decloak. You'll notice that the shimmer disappears, the color disappears, and it plays a small animation where the model is slowly but surely revealed. It looks like this. This is the animation that I'm referring to. The enemy detect start, cloak start, that's where it gets detected and turns green. This is actually only used in the Nova Covert Ops when units with this green tinge where when you put Nova into the cones of vision and the ghosts apply a behavior based on that cone of vision, which is like a giant Hellion fire breath that taints you, and then all of a sudden, bam, you're green, and now all of a sudden you're not invisible anymore, but only after a certain period of time. So it would start green, and then end is when you get out of the circle in time, and then go invisible again. These two were added. These two were added later. They're also used by units that are becoming decloaked. Detected, I mean. They're still cloaked. They're not decloaked, but they are detected. That'd be this one. They all have their different purposes, and they're all used for different reasons, and they're all used by the system config. And the system config actor does a lot. What's really funny is that if you actually try to rename this actor, it will crash your Galaxy editor. That's how intense this actor is. you actually try to, for example, I wanted to put this name on it. Its original name is sys_actor_config, but I wanted to change the name to this. And to do that, you actually have to hit save. You have to hit save again a second time. I don't know why. And then you have to double click the name. Don't change it at all. Close it, save again, then open it, and then you should be able to change it. But just double clicking this name, the editor name, just double clicking it, you will actually crash your editor. If you press OK when you change it, it will actually crash your editor. It's kind of weird. So this actor is so intense. Look at that ID tag. 15,000. Whatever the hell. That means it's the 15,000th thing. Anyway, it's not important. What is important is that it's made up of all this sensitive data. It does a lot. Technically speaking, when you look in the actor events, technically it does nothing. But the model it uses can be changed. It uses what's called cloak model. I've added this suffix because I've changed the model. And I changed the model because I wanted to get a different look. For example, in my version, this energy is white instead of blue. You can make it any color you want, although I advise that if you want to use multiple colors, then you use gray. If you use white, it's too overpowering and everything looks like a lightsaber. Use black, and when everything ends up looking more like the distortion. Put too much black here. So it has to have some amount of color. And in this example, it uses very little color. And it's very transparent. So I have achieved the look that I wanted to. But for those of you that want to look different or want to change it, the very specific material you're looking for is this locator. You can find this model in my art mod. Oh, that's another question people were having, was how do you use dependency mods? So for example, here in my import manager, you'll see that I have this absolutely disgusting amount of stuff. The import collection is getting massive. It gets bigger and bigger by the day. Excessively bigger. To the point where it's like killing my computer. And if it's killing my computer, then how is it not killing yours? Ain't I right? But models that are here in the import manager and textures, they are here because I'm testing them and I'm making them. But usually I move them to the data mod, to what's called the art dependency. Yeah, I have several different mods. You can make several different. And in my collection of mods, I have created a special dependency called the StarCraft 2 Mapster art mod. And the StarCraft 2 Mapster art mod is made up of 5 other art mods. And this collection of mods here are all different mods, but they all work together to create this one. And this one mod has all of my art assets, and along with about 13 years of other people's StarCraft 2 assets, some of them from other countries. And so there's like a collection of stuff, and if you go into your dependencies, you have to go add other, then you log in, then you click the source, and you click map name / mod, and then you type the name of my mod, which in my example is StarCraft 2 Art Mod by Kellyanne. But you can put anybody's mod there. Anybody's name. There's all kinds of mods, especially art mods. And then that will give you access to models that are not actually in your import manager. The reason you don't want them in your import manager is because it causes your map to have an insane load time. So if, for example, my mod is about 2.7 gigs. So each time that I want to add another 315 megabytes of upload space, I have to buy StarCraft 2 again. It's gotten to the point where I bought it 5 times, which means that I've gotten up to 2.7 gigs worth of space, which I have yet to actually use all of. But you guys are certainly helping me. I'm looking at you, Mr. AlleyViper and Mr. DaveSpectre. I'm looking at you, Mr. Hammer. I'm looking at you, Solstice. That's right. I'm looking at you, you StarCraft 2 Mapster nerds. Have you guys ever Googled StarCraft 2 Mapster? If you ever Google StarCraft 2 Mapster and you type the word Protoss, you're gonna have a good time if you're a Protoss lover. But if you're not a Protoss lover, well, you know what? It's hard to make Zerg models because Zerg models are hard. Look at this shit. Been fucking like a year working on that. It looks awful. It just looks awful, and just admit it. So there's all kinds of stuff that you'll find in the art mods. Not even just my art mods, but other people's art mods. And having those things in your import manager is really bad. Because each time that you load up the map reloads all these assets. It reloads them over and over again. Whereas if you put them in the dependency and then load up your match, it will download the assets that are in the art mod while you're in the lobby. So once you download them one time, you don't have to download them over and over again. Whereas if they're here in the import manager, they're not saved. They're not saved onto other people's computers. So then every time that they load the game, very specifically in the loading screen in between the lobby and gameplay, that loading period time is increased massively. So what you really want to do is make your own art mod. Now it's kind of hard to explain what an art mod is, but basically this is called, it's hard to see it, but it's a black screen. If I zoom out far enough, this is revealed to be the map area. This isn't even enough area to make a base, so that's how small this map area is. Most people would say, what the hell kind of map is this? And the answer is it's not. It's what's called an extension mod. Extension mods can be used externally by campaign maps, but also by skirmish maps. The idea being create a data mod that works on any map, as long as it's a standard issue Blizzard skirmish map. So if it's a weirdo arcade map, most of the time it's not going to work. But if it's other non-arcade maps, then it does fine. The problem is that my data mod is so elaborate that it overrides Blizzard's changes, which means that my data mod is so crazy that it only works on maps that are compatible with it, which means I have to copy paste literally all these maps. So it's kind of silly and kind of stupid, but if you want to do certain things like add a day-night cycle and change the weather and do a few other things, then you have to override Blizzard settings because Blizzard doesn't use the day-night cycle, and Blizzard uses the map initialization triggers, which can't be removed because they're inside the beginning of every single map. So in order to do that, I have to open the map, delete those, save and close the map, and then use my data mod as the dependency. That's another thing you can do. You don't even, for your data mod, you use your art mod as the dependency, but for your maps, you use the data mod because the data mod has the art mod in it. So your load time is even faster. So basically, as a consequence, you can just make a map, add your dependency, your data dependency, and that's it. You've created a completely different version of StarCraft 2 with your own custom stuff and your own custom models and whatever. And for those of you that were having the issue with the cloak model, I figured out what we were doing wrong. Essentially, there's this issue here with the displacement material. It's kind of hard to explain, but the long story short, this is half of how this material, this composite works. So this cloak displacement The problem is that you actually have to go to the normal map. You have to actually click the normal map. You actually have to click this. You have to click open. And then you don't change this name. And then you go back to displacement. And then you have to go to strength. You do the same thing. And in this example, I changed it to all kinds of things. And I found that just setting it to white maxed out was all I needed. But you will have to change that from 0 because I think this auto gets set to 0 and you don't want it 0, you want it 255, and I don't know why it goes to 0 because it's not supposed to be 0. The last thing you might want to mess around with is the strength. That's essentially how rigid the displacement material is. So if you set it high enough, you could make something look like it was pruny. The experience that I had messing around with it was it's kind of like, you know how you, like your hands get wet from washing them or sweaty or whatever, and your fingers get all pruny. Set this strength too high, then you make the entire model look like it's a giant raisin. And which kind of ruins the aesthetic of the cloak, because the cloak is supposed to be smooth. Otherwise, you can see the distortions too easily. But in some ways, some people will have different creative thoughts, so maybe they want the stealth to be easier to see, similar to Heroes of the Storm. Or maybe they want stealth to be completely nothing, completely 100% invisible, such as it was in Command & Conquer. Each editor might want to change Cloak in his own way, because cloaking is a fairly built-in mechanic. It's very difficult to change it. StarCraft 2 is not friendly when it comes to trying to change Cloak, but if you want to change Cloak, it's very hard-coded, and there's certain things you can and cannot do. So the example I'll give here is in my actor events, I have for the Dark Templar, who is a leaf jumping nerd. I mean, why shouldn't Dark Templar just magically teleport up and down cliffs? Seems right to me. So in his behaviors, and this data mod I'm making is unlocked, by the way, so if you ever want to open it and like use it to learn stuff, and I'm changing it all the time, so in here, inside my Dark Templar, I have a behavior, and that behavior applies a glaze. As you can see, some of my units are very complicated. I have a very bad time. This is called a glaze. In-game, it coats the model's flesh, the model's materials, the outside materials. For example, anytime you're playing the co-op commanders and you watch Artanis blast off the shield overcharge and all your Zerglings get coated in that blue coating. For those of you that don't play the co-op commanders, I respect that decision. I guiltily enjoyed it for what it was, for a little while anyway. I am heavily inspired by a lot of the data of the co-op commanders. Now, I may have thought that the co-op commanders were kind of lame, and I didn't like them very much, and I only played like one. And literally nobody plays co-op commanders anymore. The data of co-op commanders was actually very well made, and it was very well done. That's why it doesn't crash that much, and that's why it's really strong. The assets were well made and were not glitchy. People complained about certain levels being kind of shitty, specifically Void Thrashers, but Void Thrashers have a hard code bug that actually crashes the game that I discovered by accident. So maybe that's not even any particular person's fault. That's just whoever made the Void Thrasher model, and the Void Thrasher model is very complicated and very large and very ugly and very unwieldy. Very difficult to open and edit. But this is a glaze, and glazes are represented by these spheres. They too, similar to the Cloak Glaze, come with a mesh, but later on Blizzard decided, oh, we're not going to have a carrier in a box inside each and every glaze model. That's why this is what, in my opinion, I think this is the first ever glaze model. Because later glazes all come in spheres. Not just the ones made by this person, but also the ones made by others. such as Blizzard itself. You can find glazes by going into the model browser and typing glaze. And in glaze, you will see various different glazes. For example, there's my glaze, the gray stealth. This is my custom defiler glaze. It's based off a parasitic bomb, but made red. This is a glaze used by the co-op commander data. It's used whenever Alarak becomes empowered. I don't know my Alarak data, so I don't remember the exact reason, but basically Alarak is like, oh yeah, I'm Q from Star Trek, and I can flick my finger and send you 16,000 light years that way. Alarak's pretty powerful as far as StarCraft 2 is concerned. And for those of you who don't know, Alarak is voice acted by the person in Star Trek who plays Q. So if you're a fan of Q in Star Trek, then you'll probably enjoy Alarak's humor. And if you're a fan of Alarak, then you should just go right now and start watching some Star Trek The Next Generation. Because that's where Q comes from. Q is also in a bunch of other random shit. Did you know that he was Discord in My Little Pony? How fucking weird is that? Each of these glazes have a different purpose. This is another one that's used by Alarak. This one I think is used when he kills units. This is used by when those units are killed, and then he gets a slurp. Whenever his little supplicants die, they slurp down into his energy hole, and he drinks those units' health via a missile. It's a missile turret missile that flies off from the dead unit. The unit dies, plays a death animation, then a missile turret missile that looks like a red orb flies over towards Alarak, and then he gets this glaze. This is the glaze that's applied by the Amon shards during the epilogue. This is a glaze, I think, used by Abathur co-op commander. This is another co-op commander. I think it might be from the Mirahan. This here's the campaign glaze that's applied in that one level where the areas of effect keeps expanding, and if your units are caught in the area of effect, they become stunned, unable to move, and then they take damage over time until they die, and the area of effect keeps growing. That's what this is. That's what this particular glaze is used by. This is a glaze that I imported, made by a custom editor. I don't remember the person's name. I think. Who made it? Enoki. That's who made it. Enoki made this. It's essentially it's similar to what I did with the Defiler Plague, but he based it off, or they based. I don't know if it's a girl or boy. Bad now. They based it off of what I think is called the blood smear. The blood smear texture. And so essentially, this is a texture or a material created to be used by a glaze that makes your units look as though they're covered in creep. I'm using this for Terran units that are on creep, because I'm adding a negative bonus to Terran units that walk in creep. Instead of just going the normal speed and having the disadvantage of Zerg being faster on creep, I'm fundamentally changing the game so that Terrans are slower on creep than they are off it. It should de-incentivize Terran players to want to be on creep in the first place, making creep more important. And there's even different versions of this creep glaze. This is the Defiler glaze created by Blizzard for Plague when they were creating the multiplayer stuff. They were very close to deciding to give Zerg Defilers. They were just as considered as lurkers, and we know that lurkers did get pulled into skirmish, and so in their attempt to get Zerg more units, one of the units they were going to bring back was the Defiler, similar to the way that it's a StarCraft 1 unit, it feels natural, and the lurker, it feels natural. It's a natural counter to certain things. It's been in Zerg units roster since 20-something years ago, So why not bring back the Defiler? And that's why the Defiler has the tag MP, which stands for multiplayer. And this actually causes some issues for people that are editing the Defiler and trying to find the buffs and the behaviors, because there's two types of Defilers. There's the Defiler that was created for the Wings of Liberty campaign mission, the final campaign mission, when you have to fight Kerrigan and you're dealing with Kerrigan and you're protecting the fucking Delnaga artifact, and it's fucking, you're using it to blast away all the Zerg, and Kerrigan is using the power of her mind to grab your battle cruisers and pull them down into the ground and instantly killing them, and instantly killing 3 or 4 battle cruisers per second. Yeah, do you guys remember that? Remember when they patched that? They patched the shit out of that like a week or two later, where basically they gave a 5-second cooldown so she couldn't do it anymore. But if for those of you that had managed to get to the final mission before the 5-day mark or whatever, like I did, you would have found that Kerrigan had an autocast ability that had 0.00 nothing seconds cooldown that would kill battlecruisers. And it was unplayable. And they didn't patch it out right away, and it was really bad. They left it there for a long time. And in that level, there was defilers. They were going to come and they were going to cast Dark Swarm on her so that she couldn't take any range damage. Could you believe that? Terran units that aren't doing any range damage because Kerrigan is under a Dark Swarm and she's killing 4 battlecruisers per second. Guys. And so eventually they left the Defiler. The Defiler doesn't come out. It stays in the mineral line, and you never see it. You would never know it's there. And so does the Lurker. And both units were there. That's when they were starting to set up multiplayer. They were trying to figure out what units they wanted to bring into multiplayer. And so in Wings of Liberty, the Defiler has 2 tags. One is the Defiler, and the other is called Defiler MP. And the Defiler, the first form of the Defiler, only has Dark Swarm. Doesn't have any other abilities. But the MP one has all the original Brood War abilities. It has Consume, it has Dark Swarm, it has Plague. And this is the material created during Heart of the Swarm, which was to be used by Defilers, which were, for whatever reason, were never brought into Heart of the Swarm, which made no sense to a lot of people. These are the co-op commander. I don't know them that well, but each of them does stuff. This is here is used by the units that are coming down. There's a couple of Mirahan units where they come out of the sky and they drop down, and it looks as though they're on fire for a couple seconds before they go from being out of the sky, out of view, to being sky level. It's turned on and off, and it makes it look so that units that are, created look cool. Most of the multiplayer players will recognize this one as being used by Lockdown. This is one that most people won't recognize. It's called Ice Tangent. It's used by some of the doodads in the ice levels on Calder during Heart of the Swarm. It's also used by the campaign map that freezes all your roaches. The more Ursidons you kill, the less frozen your Ursidons are. And so if you hadn't killed any first Ursidons, then you'd have completely solid frozen roaches that were frozen solid. This was the glaze that was applied by that. This is the glaze. I don't think it's actually used because I don't recognize it. These are used by the Nova Covert Ops campaign levels. This is her suit for whenever she makes a decoy, and it puts the glaze on the decoy. This is the parasitic bomb glaze. I think it got abandoned in favor of the other one that was later. Most of you would recognize this. This is phase armor. This is the glaze that we use. That's used by immortals whenever their immortal shield pops. For those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, Protoss are these aliens that have gold armor and stuff, and they're used by they use machines basically. And so these immortals, they have a shield that absorbs damage basically. They also have what's called a shield model, and this shield model gets summoned onto the outside back parts of the immortal. It attaches to their guns and it attaches to their turret. But the rest of the model doesn't get that. The rest of the model just gets this. It gets the phase armor. So the arms and the turret, they get their own little separate bit covered by the physical model of the mesh. And then there's the rest of the model, the legs. We just get this glaze, and that's what this glaze is, called phase armor. Each glaze serves a different purpose. Another glaze that I don't actually recognize. I don't know what that's used by. I suspect it's used by, oh right, the ramps in the epilogue when Amon comes and uses his forehead to destroy your mineral line and it kills any probes or virtually anything, including your command centers and your nexus and your hatchery. Just blasts the terrain away. I think the terrain is created by invisible platforms that actually, so that when they're destroyed, they vanish. But when they're there, they just look like terrain. And the invisible platforms are just there. This is the super battery. This is another version of the snow. Comes in a few shapes and sizes to make. This is what's used by the covert ops, where you would build your buildings on that Terran buildings on that level where it's snowy. And at first they wouldn't have any snow, then they would get a little bit of snow, then it would get more snow, and then finally they would reach the third tier, which is where the whole building is super snowy. These three are used exclusively by Terran buildings campaign. It's another Alarak one. Most people would know this one well. This is created by the Oracle. When the Oracle casts the Stasis Sword, the Stasis Trap, and it jizzes all over everybody, and then they all get covered in green jizz, and then they can't move for 600 years. That's what that is. This is the Stetman's. This one. This is what I based off my plague off of, and this is what parasitic bomb looks like for the most part. I think it's a Tychus fire bat. I don't know that one. Oil spill. That's kind of cool. Vines. This one's interesting. This one is only used by a couple doodads. It makes it so that the doodad looks as though it's covered in plants. This is one of the void shards, I think. Yeah, void shard. This is another void shard. This one's unique because it has what appears to be two. It has two material layers, and you know that because of the directions. Because one is very obviously going this way, but on this screen here it's going up, and it can't be the same thing. It does different things in different places. It's spinning from this perspective, but it's going vertically at the same time. Like, it's very trippy. It's actually very interesting material. Very interesting looking. This is used by Kerrigan whenever she does her giant pink AoE circle that stuns the shit out of everybody, and then nobody can move or attack or do anything, and basically StarCraft 2 doesn't work anymore because of this. That's this glaze. These are special. These are glazes created by the community, very specifically by a person named Enoki/Delphinium. You will only have these. Go out of your way to find them. In my example, I'm using this one. It's the green glaze. This glaze makes it so that any unit that is cloaked will not only be transparent, but will also be green. If you create actors and use these events, actor creation, blah, 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 behavior on. You have to have behavior, you have to choose your behavior, and you have to click on create. Then you need this one, which says model material apply to main. And if you're really picky, you can add the others, such as secondary and emissive, and do all kinds of things. But I only use one. I just apply it to main. And then when you have this behavior off, this part's kind of important. You destroy it. This chain of actor events will allow you to create this glaze on Dark Templar while simultaneously using a different cloak model, such as what I was using before, which was that gray cloak model. This glaze, combined with that cloak model, will allow you to choose different colors for your stealth. If you want to use different colors for your stealth, you have to do this. This is the only way to do it, because it's essentially hard-coded to only use one stealth model, one cloak glaze. To try and add more would involve messing with the flags, and I'm not even sure you can do that. I've tried. I can't find where you do. So for example, here we have the cloak model. This is the vanilla cloak model, and it uses the blue stealth, which is what most people normally see. And then there's my version, which is more thin. But if you use a glaze, via behavior in the unit, I promise finding. Didn't click that button. You can use all kinds of properties for this behavior. In my example, this behavior is applied only when they have shields. So when their shields reach 0, they lose this glaze. But there's quite a few glazes to choose from. Some of them look really neat. This one, for example, I think was planned by this particular dev team pair to make it so that when Phoenix were lifting units off the ground, they would have this. I think they were in the process of changing all the anti-grav stuff to look green as well. This one I think is inspired by Lockdown. Pretty sure that's Lockdown. This one's pretty interesting. Well, it makes it so that something that looks as though it's red hot. It synergizes with lava really. So if you were to like implement lava in your level, and then you ever noticed how like the units just sort of look exactly the same even when they get inundated by lava, you can actually apply this and they look. This is a pylon power effect. So whenever Protoss buildings die, like the pylons die, the buildings become unpowered, and so these glazes get turned on and off. So this is when they're on, and this is when they're off. So most Protoss players would recognize this one. This is from the campaign when you're being repaired by the heal beam. From outer space, it comes down and hits your units, and then it's look like that. This is the shield I was talking about before, the one that can coat your Zerglings. Most co-op commanders that play Artanis will recognize this one. One of my personal favorites, to be honest. And this one is used by units that get sucked into the mothership core's slow aura. Essentially. Yeah, so there you go. This one is one I haven't experimented with too much, but I'm looking forward to seeing how it looks on some Terran units. such as Marines and stuff. I think it might look pretty cool. And also the creep ones. I think that the Terran units are going to look, siege tanks and stuff are going to look really cool when they have a creep place on. I think that's going to make them look all rustic and gothic and steampunk. It's going to be fucking awesome. And then the Marine, they're all going to use. This glaze is pretty cool too. Violet Blake. Maybe that's where Creep Glaze got its idea. Does look kind of similar, doesn't it? That I think about it. Now that I think about it. Yeah. That's interesting. I was wondering how that was made. Fascinating. But yes, many of these glazes are available. Oh, right. People were asking a question. They asked how many glazes can you have on a unit? The answer is 2. Can't have any more than 2. Because if you have more than 2, you're going to kill your computer and you're going to kill your game. It's time to drink some more beer. Smoke some more weed. I'll catch you guys in on the next one. Play some more Starship Troopers. Thank you guys so much for watching. Self-simplicity.